Hi, and welcome back to CyberOne's certification and training program. If you're here as part of the certification program, there is no exercise at the end of this segment. And if you're here for training purposes, but you'd like to learn more about how to get certified as a CyberOne security expert, then drop us a line at support@cb1security.com or just contact your account manager and we can give you that information. Okay, so let's get started. Today we're in the compliance management training section, and we're going to be showing you 3 different ways to create internal controls in our system based upon your workflow requirements. So let's just go to the workflow diagram for a second. So there are a couple of approaches that we can take when we're creating internal controls. And of course, we use internal controls to link policies to your requirements, so your regulations or standards. And we can also do internal control sets to do compliance through control activities on targets as well. We're going to show you a couple of different ways that you can approach creating internal controls in the system. Very simple processes for each one of them. So let's go ahead and get into the management platform. So here we are in our management platform and we are in the compliance management module. And the first thing we're going to do is go to internal controls. And this is where you can create a policy set that you can name here using the create view for any audit that you're doing or certification purposes for your company. And the simple way to do this is just to click new internal control. And we can build out our internal control directly into the record here. So first we'll start by adding all the information that we need for the internal control. So we'll keep this at the highest level. So perhaps something like that. And then we can describe exactly what we mean by the control here. Something along like this. And maybe even set a requirement beyond that. So again, you can create your own internal control first and foremost. And then we have a number of different options in terms of the information we provide in conjunction with this record. So we can establish that control frequency. So this one for policies, we're probably going to be reviewing these annually. We can add the risk category if we want to add the risk. So policies and procedures, we have the opportunity to add this control to our risk register so we can connect any findings back to our policy. And then, of course, we can connect it into the policy if we so desire. And again, we can click on the search here. And I'll select information security. And then we go into the control solution, so implementation effectively. So this may or may not be applicable, but we can label the ownership of the control. Is this an internal control that we're testing? Are we testing this for a third party? Is this across multiple parts of the organizations or just not applicable? We can label the source of the internal control. And then implementation status is a status that allows us to know whether we are actually currently implementing this internal control in our policy, whether it's partially implemented or fully implemented and therefore is in the policy. If it's not implemented, that means we want to go and put it into our policy at some point and make sure that we are covered by the regulation and so on and so forth. So And then finally, we should create a content source that refers back to the set of internal controls that we are creating. So we can always find this set using a search option. So I'm going to create this as a ISO audit. I'm just going to put ISO 27002. And label this as my first control for 2020 for my ISO audit. And of course, I can then add any guidance or related reference documents that I wish to, guidance on the control implementation. And then when I'm ready, I just click save, or I can click save and new to go to a next record, and I can continue just creating on. All right, so I'm going to cancel out of that. Then if I go back to my internal controls list, you'll see that here now my internal control is showing. And in part it's showing because here, because I use this ISO 27002 in my content source, and I've set up this create view to capture anything that has that ISO 27002 in that content source. So that's where the content source can become important if you're creating a control set and you want to keep all those controls together and be able to search for them easily. So that's the first way of creating our internal controls. Next, let's go to policy management. And so another option we have in our policies tab is to actually create internal controls directly linked to our policies. So here you see that we can link in internal controls here. And so in these policy records, you'll see we can write policies directly into CyberOne. And we do have a section for policy statements. And what we recommend is that we actually create these policy statements as internal controls. So you can do this one way or the other. You can write the internal control first and then transfer it into the policy statements section. Or you can just create internal controls and skip over this. And what we're going to do is, I just want to make sure I copied and pasted that. I'll copy that so I can paste it in. So I'm actually going to take my policy statement, and now I'll go to my internal controls, and I'll go new internal control. I'm going to put that in the description first, and then create that name. We can just contract that a little bit. So there we go. There's our internal control. And again, I can set my cadence for testing this control. I can add my content source. And there, once I'm ready to go, I can add all of this other information in that we talked about earlier. And again, I can do save or save in new. And the great thing about if I click save in new here is you see it continues to link this to my policy. So the next internal control I do will also be connected into that change management policy. And if I cancel out of this for a second and go back to our internal control list, you'll see that second internal control has been created. And then if I go into that and I go to my policy, you'll also see that now it's connected into my policy. All right, so the final way we're going to show you then is to use the actual standard or regulation as guidance to create your internal controls. And again, a very simple process here. So we'll start with a cybersecurity framework, the NIST CSF cybersecurity framework. And we'll stay in the governance mode. So we'll go to our governance section. And then we can simply just grab this governance control and do add to internal control. and that will create an internal control for us. And so then I can go back to my internal controls set. And this time I'll go to all. And you can see that I've got this organized by last modified. So here is my internal control for CSF, for the cybersecurity framework. And then I have the option, if I want, of then adding child controls effectively to that. So let's say we're still in the governance section. And we want to take our additional governance controls and just create one internal control for those, for this governance set in this CSF. Then the next thing I can just do is grab those other the three remaining governance controls. And this time I'm going to do map to internal control. Remember, before I did add to internal control. I'm going to do map to internal control. I will select the control that I just created, and then I just do map. And there, if I go back to my internal control record, I can now see a couple of different things. So first, all of my internal control, my control references have been added there. So now what I can do is then just go in and modify this to fit my company's requirements. But now I do have both the control library that I chose mapped. And then the great thing about CyberOne is in each of our controls in the control library, and I'll just open it up here just to show you. What we've also done is we have crosswalked these controls with other regulations and requirements. And you can request us to crosswalk these with other requirements if you don't see the ones here. So this really gives you that additional set of being able to use one internal control to test multiple controls. So if you're looking at many different standards or requirements, a lot of times we've overlapped those already, creating crosswalks for them in the CyberOne control library. And so when you populate the control library for your internal control, when you map those together, these crosswalks automatically overlap, so you can see all of the different types of regulations and requirements you're testing for using this internal control. So that's just a handy piece of automation in CyberOne. So those are the three ways to create internal controls in our system. So that concludes our training for today. Thank you very much.